Master University in Canada had mice work out on a treadmill for about an hour 3 times a week. A control group of mice watched Matlock reruns. Well, they may as well have. They did not work out. And the mice that exercised had way less fat in their bone marrow cavities and a big increase in blood cells in the marrow and in the circulation. I don't like exercising, but I really don't like fat in my marrow. The early bird gets the worm, and may avoid skin cancer. Because a new mouse study suggests that, for humans, tanning in the mornings may be less likely to permanently damage DNA and cause skin cancer. A mouse's levels of the DNA, repairing protein XPA, are different from ours. They peak in the morning and bottom out in the evening. Researchers exposed mice to UV radiation when their XPA was at its minimum level, around 4 a.m., and others to the same rays around 4 p.m., when XPA levels peaked.
The little black boxes in airplanes provide useful information after a crash has taken place. Now researchers have devised a way to use black box info from planes that do not crash, to help prevent accidents from ever happening. Some airlines already use a program that checks 88 flight parameters in the black box. But a Boeing 787 can record 2,000 flight parameters, so the researchers employed what's called cluster analysis. They took data from 365 flights of Boeing 777s in a month of operations of a now-defunct European airline. They filtered the data into clusters, groupings of flights with similar patterns. Any data points outside of normal operations appeared as an anomaly. The information generated identified 3 problematic flights. In one, for instance, the data showed that the pilot had trouble rotating the plane during takeoff. The system can identify anomalies that suggest both physical and operational issues, such as those that caused a runway accident in Chicago in December 2005. The researchers from MIT in Spain will present their paper in October at the 30th Digital Avionics Systems Conference in Seattle. Because, to prevent future accidents, you might have to think inside the box. Jiminy Cricket may not actually hold the door open for his lady friends, but he can still be chivalrous. Researchers from the University of Exeter discovered that when threatened by predators, a male field cricket will protect his mate by letting her enter their burrow first. The work is published in the journal Current Biology. Using microphones and infrared cameras, researchers monitored a Spanish cricket population for 3 seasons. They identified each cricket with a tiny numbered name tag and a DNA fingerprint taken from a sample of its leg. This Big Brother scrutiny revealed the details of cricket relationships, from their courtship time to how they conducted their affairs.
We are social animals, so you might assume our brains are built to excel when we cooperate with each other, as opposed to when we function in isolation. Now research with another animal supports that notion. Plain-tailed wrens in Ecuador are famous for duets between males and females. While their song is done cooperatively, with the male and female singing alternate syllables, it sounds surprisingly like one bird singing solo. In a 2007 Vanity Fair article, Christopher Hitchens asked, "Why are men, taken on average and as a whole, funnier than women?" Well, a recent study finds that men might have a tiny edge over women in producing humor, but the gap is too small to account for the stereotype. Scientists had 16 male and 16 female subjects write funny captions for 20 New Yorker magazine cartoons in 45 minutes. Then the captions were rated by a different group of 34 male and 47 female subjects. Men's captions rated higher on average than women's captions, but only by a mere 0.11 points out of perfect score of 5.0. The study is published in the journal Psychonomic Bulletin and Review.
They found that the birds' neurons reacted far more strongly to the duet than when they sang their parts alone. The research is in the journal Science. That's fine for Ecuadorian birds, but what about us humans? Well, vertebrate animals all have similar neurotransmitter systems and the brain is organized in much of the same way, so the paper's authors hold that there is relevance to the human brain. Or at least to those vertebrates who have a tendency to cooperate in the first place. The researchers also found that unfunny captions were more often wrongly attributed to women and funny ones misattributed to men. Given the tiny edge men held, why does the stereotype have a strong hold? Maybe men just make more attempts at humor. For example, fewer women win the New Yorker caption contests, but fewer enter. When women do enter, however, they tend to win with fewer attempts compared to men, which may give women the last laugh. They focus their attention on birds because our feathered friends have a cardiovascular system much like our own, in that blood exerts pressure on the blood vessel walls. The results? Parakeet thrombocytes don't stick together like platelets do. They also don't block blood flow in the birds' arteries the same way that platelets do when they form clots in mice. Which means that mice may be more likely to survive a bloodletting, pecking. But birds are far less likely to suffer from the clot formation called economy class syndrome, despite being frequent flyers. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But sometimes what makes you stronger can kill you, at least when it comes to blood clotting. Because the stickiness that allow platelets to heal your wounds also raises your risk of heart attack. All mammals use platelets to help prevent blood loss after traumatic injury. But birds don't have them, nor do reptiles or fish. Instead, these critters have blood cells called thrombocytes, which are about twice the size of platelets. But is bigger necessarily better when it comes to clotting? Scientists took thrombocytes from parakeets and put them to the test. The work appears in the journal Blood.
The lives of distinguished people often take a lot of telling. Yet even devotees might raise an eyebrow at the heft of Sir Paul McCartney's memoir, 2 volumes totaling 960 pages. Casual Beatles fans may be surprised by the title, too. though most would consider Sir Paul the band's musician. With an honorable mention for George Harrison, John Lennon typically gets the plaudits for writing. In a poll by the BBC in 2001 to rank the greatest lyricists, Lennon received more than twice as many votes as McCartney. Even if the distribution of women's occupations matched that of men, if women were the doctors and men were the nurses, she calculates that at most a third of the pay gap would. Important cause is that women curtail their careers as a disappear the most generously part of a rational household response to labor markets, which reward anyone, male or female, who is willing to hold down what Mose Golden calls a greedy job. These are roles, such as those in law, accountancy and finance, that demand long and unpredictable hours. Parents need somebody to be on call at home in case a child falls ill and needs picking up from school, or needs cheering on at a concert or football match. Signs that secure borrowing remains robust and firm. Data on manufacturing and retail sales, released on Thursday, painted the picture of an economy that has yet to be cooled by the recent state's spate of interest rate rises. Dave Hackenberg, a beekeeper since 1962, can usually tell what killed his bees just by looking at them. If they're lying on the ground in front of a hive, it's probably pesticides, he says. If the bees are deformed and wingless, it's probably vampire mites. But last fall, Hackenberg saw something he had never seen before. Thousands of his bee colonies simply disappeared. He was in Florida at the time, pulling the lids off some of his commercial hives. To his horror, they were all empty. It is about 100 years since that great Canadian-born physician Sir William Osler, Regius Professor of Medicine in Oxford, complained about the increasing influence of the pharmaceutical industry on the medical profession. He would be turning in his grave at the way the industry now dominates doctors' prescribing habits. It does this not only by direct and indirect pressure on the doctors themselves, but also by encouraging the public to ask for scripts. And one particular crop, almond in the US and now in Australia, is transforming the world of beekeeping and of bees. What has happened is that something serendipitous came along, that people found out, that doctors found out that almonds are good for you, a confection, but it's good for you. The almond board got a very aggressive promotion going on for almonds. They actually, I just heard recently, send out sales reps to cardiologists at hospitals to promote the heart benefits of almonds. In a very good promotion of almonds, and it's legitimate promotion because they are a healthy food.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted first of all to have been appointed to this professorship. The role is going to be about public engagement in science. It is about marketing science accessible to as wide an audience as possible. It's about making it easier for our academics here at the University of Birmingham to talk about their research to the general public, and it's not just about a one-way flow of information, it very much is about dialogue. My current research at the moment is really quite broad. I work at the interface between the arts and humanities, particularly archaeology, but trying to find questions which are difficult to answer unless you start integrating computing and visualization, so really I work in this boundary between trying to understand cultural questions about the past. But those sorts of questions that you can't address unless you start reconstructing, start modeling and visualizing past landscapes, objects and movement of people.
The World Health Organization says 12 years ago, India alone was responsible for almost 70% of all polio cases around the world. It calls India's success against polio one of the most significant achievements in public health. WHO officials say India's accomplishment proved the crippling disease can be eliminated in even the most challenging circumstances with a strong political commitment. The number of polio cases has decreased from an estimated 350,000 a year to 33, since the WHO launched its global eradication campaign in 1988. This waited Monday for the results of an election called a return to democratic rule, but which has been widely criticized as an exercise designed by Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha to entrench his military's stranglehold on power. Preliminary official results released late Sunday showed that with 93% of ballots counted, the military-backed Phalang Pracharat party was in the lead with about 7.6 million votes. That's short of what would be needed for a majority in parliament. In second place was the Pheu Thai party of former Prime Minister Vanessa with 7.1 million votes. The campaign was marred by allegations of vote buying. However, complaints were few on polling day, with election observers from Australia, Canada, the United States and the 10 members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations on hand.
Millions of people in North Korea are short of food. Perpetually hungry children, pregnant and nursing mothers are suffering the most. The World Food Programme reports South Korea's landmark donation, the biggest in more than a decade, will help ease the nutritional crisis faced by 2 million of this particularly vulnerable group of people. Under an agreement worked out by WFP between both countries, South Korea will donate 50,000 metric tons of rice and $4.5 million in cash for food needs in North Korea.
All around the world, significant parts of our cultural heritage are threatened by pollution, neglect, carelessness and greed. In learning the importance of our history, we come to understand the need to protect significant remains from the past so that future generations can come to understand their heritage.
Dogs are not just man's best friend. Previous studies have shown that kids with dogs are less likely to develop asthma. Now a new study may show how, if results from mice apply to us. The work was presented at a meeting of the American Society for Microbiology. The study tests what's called the hygiene hypothesis. The idea is that extreme cleanliness may actually promote disease later on. Researchers collected dust from homes that had a dog. They fed that house dust to mice. They then infected the mice with a common childhood infection called respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV.
Heavy rains are expected to fall in a few weeks. 8 agencies are racing to shore up flimsy shelters and stabilize shaky terrain before the monsoon season begins. The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says the work ahead is monumental, but preparations are off to a better start this year than last. 8 agencies last year had to deal with the massive influx of more than 740,000 Rohingya refugees fleeing violence and persecution in Myanmar. They arrived over a period of a few months, straining local resources and requiring vast amounts of humanitarian assistance.
The World Health Organization says 12 years ago, India alone was responsible for almost 70% of all polio cases around the world. It calls India's success against polio one of the most significant achievements in public health. WHO officials say India's accomplishment proved the crippling disease can be eliminated in even the most challenging circumstances with a strong political commitment. The number of polio cases has decreased from an estimated 350,000 a year to 33. Since the WHO launched its global eradication campaign in 1988.
A waterproof drone is being used by Australian scientists to collect the highly treasured nasal mucus of migrating whales. The snot is rich with fresh DNA, viruses and bacteria, and is collected by a drone that hovers over the blowholes of humpback whales as they embark on their epic annual journey along Australia's east coast. From Sydney, Phil Mercer reports, whales, like all mammals, need air, and come to the surface to breathe through a blowhole. Vanessa Parada, a marine biologist at Macquarie University, says that nasal mucus indicates the health of the whale.
All around the world, significant parts of our cultural heritage are threatened by pollution, neglect, carelessness and greed. In learning the importance of our history, we come to understand the need to protect significant remains from the past so that future generations can come to understand their heritage. The word hormone is derived from a Greek verb that means to excite. Hormones are found in all multicellular organisms and function to coordinate the parts of the organism.
A hormone is a chemical signal. It is produced by one part of the body and is then transported to other parts of the body where it triggers responses in cells and tissues.
The concept of chemical messengers and plants first emerged from a series of classic experiments on how plant stands respond to light. Think about this: a houseplant on the windowsill grows toward light. If you rotate the plant, it will soon reorient its growth until its leaves again face the window. The growth of a plant toward light is called phototropism. In a forest or other natural ecosystem where plants may be crowded,
The World Health Organization says 12 years ago, India alone was responsible for almost 70% of all polio cases around the world. It calls India's success against polio one of the most significant achievements in public health. WHO officials say India's accomplishment proved the crippling disease can be eliminated in even the most challenging circumstances with a strong political commitment. the number of polio cases has decreased from an estimated 350,000 a year to 33, since the WHO launched its global eradication campaign in 1988. India has downplayed the impact of US plans to end New Delhi's preferential trade status that allows duty-free access to products worth $5.6 billion. Saying that India has not assured the United States that it will provide equitable and reasonable access to its markets, US President Donald Trump has directed the US Trade Representative's office to remove India from a program that grants it preferential trade treatment. In 2017, India was the biggest beneficiary of the Generalized System of Preferences, GSP, which lowers duties on exports from about 120 developing countries. The Indian Commerce Secretary told reporters in New Delhi that India has no plans to impose retaliatory tariffs on US goods.